We want to welcome you back to All Things Real Estate. Once again, your hosts, Gary Kelly and Brad Avergon.
We're coming back to All Things Real Estate. I'm Gary Kelly with Castaneda Realty Group and Brad Avergon's with Fairway. And we had asked Brad to hold the thought. So let's see how he's done.
I was holding my thought. So here was my thought. We were talking about it. You brought up the example of a car on a property that was being sold, and the car was not drivable and had to be towed out the morning of the walkthrough. And I think the important thing here is, and you gave an example of where you notarized a will for an individual. It's a difficult conversation for families to have. But I have been in situations, and I'm sure you have, Gary, and I'm sure our listeners and viewers have heard of situations where the heirs are, they're just either overwrought. They're emotionally just, they can't come to a decision because it's too painful, or there's infighting, right? The two of the heirs or more disagree with each other. And so there's infighting. The best thing that our viewers and listeners can do is to take the time to meet with an estate planning attorney and do a simple will, a simple power of attorney, and a simple healthcare proxy to give the people that you leave behind. Well, not the will is the thing for the people to leave behind. The healthcare proxy and the power of attorney is for your significant other to go through what your wishes are and give them the power. What?
Or whomever got appointed. Doesn't it have to just be the significant other?
Right. Whoever got appointed. That's true. Good point, Gary. So whoever you want to be appointed as your proxy to state what your desires are while you're still alive, but you're incapable of saying those things, you want them to have the power to do that. But the will is for the people that you leave behind so that there is no infighting. So there's a clear decision and a clear process who's going to get what and what's going to happen to it. Rather than just sit there and they have to figure out, oh, we're going to sell mom's or dad's house. What are we going to do with Sally's stapler? Get that stuff down. I know it's a difficult conversation. It's a good stapler. Get that stuff down on paper. Just get it down on paper. It makes such a difference for the people that you leave behind, and nobody wants their heirs to fight, and nobody and people want to leave their heirs time to grieve and not have to worry about some of the stuff that, quite frankly, Gary and I deal with, which is just the property. And what are we going to do with this property? How are we going to get rid of it? Where's it supposed to go? Who's supposed to get it?
I had one where the seller was in a memory care unit, and the seller's daughter was who we were working with. And it got to, you've got to get the deed signed. Okay. There was no POA. You need to get the deed signed. So I'm ready to, go get the thing notarized, whatever. And I get a call from the attorney who is a friend of mine. And the attorney says, Gary, you need to make sure that person is in their right mind when you sign it. And we know that there's a question of that because they're on a memory care floor. You need to be very careful. I'm like, holy cow, you're right. You're absolutely right. I'm not equipped to judge is someone in their right mind or not. I can say that Brad's never in his right mind, but that's a joke. So the question became, how do I do that? And he says, well, you do small talk. You go in and you say, what do you think about the Red Sox? Or, the big game this weekend, who you're looking for? And make sure that there is an awareness and an engagement around that. In this particular case, talking not so much out of school, the gentleman has passed away, but I did the small talk thing, but he was angry with what was happening. And what he was angry about wasn't that his daughter was doing the things that needed to happen, but he knew that he wasn't going back to his house. He knew that, he was at the end of his run and he wasn't happy about it. So, I wouldn't be happy either.
Yeah, right. Understandable. Yeah.
That's the part of being in real estate that, a lot of crap in the news about real estate and commissions and how easy it is and fast money. People don't realize the human side of it, where you sit and you've got people that are in tears. Sometimes they're in tears because they're selling the house and poor mom and dad, blah, blah, blah. Sometimes they're in tears because they didn't get the house. Sometimes you deal with people that are divorcing, and it's rare that they're both.
It's I mean, let's face it, we're talking about sad things. We're talking about end of life. We're talking about end of marriage, end of a commitment. At some point those folks were in love, and so these are difficult things. But that's why it's so important to have those difficult conversations early on. One of the things that I do, in addition to what's called forward mortgages, which is what most people do, is I do reverse mortgages. And reverse mortgages are when someone's over 62, they can basically turn their property into an income stream, or it certainly relieve them of any mortgage obligation. So for seniors, that's sometimes really, really important. When I say mortgage obligations, meaning the minimum monthly payment that is due. That payment can get deferred. But what it does is it falls upon the heirs when that person either moves into a facility permanently or passes away. And so I'm a huge advocate of bringing the heirs in early on in those conversations so that everybody's aware of what's going on. And during that time, I advocate, listen, this is what we're trying to do to help mom and dad, let's say, with the house. Do you have any concerns? Do you have any questions? And by the way, because right now they're a very clear mind and things like that, right? By the way, this is a great time to bring in that estate planning attorney so that we're all on that same page. So there's a clear plan, and mom and dad don't have to worry about what's going to happen, and the kids don't have to worry about what's going to happen. They know exactly because instructions have been put in place by the parents. This is what I want to happen. This is our desires, and everything can operate and allow the children in this particular case to grieve, which is also a very important need, probably the most important need. The parents have passed, the children to grieve if that's the case. But that's why it's so important to have those people, bring them in early on. And by the way, if you don't know anybody, feel free to reach out to Gary and Sue or myself and ask us, because we've got people that we know and trust that would handle the situation appropriately and delicately.
I again refer to my own personal experience. When my dad died, my mom was just on a mission to sell the house. Well, Mom, it's great that you're going to sell the house. Where are you going to live?
Right.
I'll get an apartment. It'll be fine. And long story short, I bought the house. She stayed there. I had a friend that has since passed away. And he says, you've got to charge her rent. So what do you mean you've got to charge her rent? That seems harsh. It's my mom. This is a family transaction. And he says, you charge her $1 a year. And if she's ever in a position of not being able to pay it, then you're not going to have to keep the building up waiting for her to come back to it. I'm like, oh, geez. Yeah. There are people that are smarter than me at that stuff. God love them.
Which is good. But listen, we don't want to bring everybody down. It's September. It's a good time of year, right? We've got the fall upon us, and there's other reasons.
As people come and look at the falling rates right now, what would you tell them to be looking at?
So right now, interest rates for good credit, good down payment are I would say are in the mid sixes. I think that's a great time to lock in, and people, they have different approaches. Sometimes people will say, okay, well, I don't know, maybe should I not buy now? Should I hold off? No. If you could get a home right now, buy a home because it's time for you to buy a home, right? Buy a home because you're ready to buy a home and you want to live there for at least a couple of years. If interest rates drop, and we're all hoping that they do over time, you can always step that rate down. That's what I tell my clients. I said, look, if you lock in at 6.5 today and rates drop to 5.99 in 6 months, we can refinance you. At that point, it's simply a math equation that I do for you and say, listen, we can save you $100 a month, $1,200 a year or more. And at that point, it usually makes sense to folks to consider it, especially, and I'll do the break-even analysis and say, well, you have to say that you think you're going to live in the house for another 2 years or 3 years. If you do, you'll pay back those closing costs. Or in some cases, there are no closing costs where the lender pays those fees, or they can be rolled into the mortgage if you want. There's so many different options. But the point is, that's a math equation versus a living situation. If you're ready to buy a home, you want to get that, and you want to stop paying your landlord's mortgage and pay your own, so increase your equity, then do it.
If someone comes to you right now and says, Brad, rates are down, I'm going to stay in my house, I want to do a cash out refi because I want to go on a trip, what is your reaction to that?
Well, so cash out refi, I certainly do cash out refis all the time for projects and folks that may have a nice low interest rate. They got it a few years ago. And I do those all the time. We can do, whatever they need, as long as they have the equity and the credit and they qualify for that second mortgage. Depending how big the project is. If it's a $10,000 trip, maybe you don't need an equity line specifically for that, but having an equity line is not a bad idea. The trick with an equity line is to have a plan to pay it down.
Yeah, my view is if you're taking money out of your house to go on a trip, it's probably not the right thing to do.
Yeah, I tend to frown on that. I tend to frown on that as well, Gary. But I do believe in using it as a tool. So, for an example, is sometimes people will be looking to purchase a car. The problem with a car loan, because cars are $50,000 now, that's an expensive car payment, principal paid back over a 5-year period.
I know what kind of car you drive. It's way over 50 grand these days.
I drive an old car. It doesn't. If I had to buy a new one, I wouldn't be buying it. But nonetheless, if you buy it on an equity line, you can pay interest only. The trick is to have a plan in place that you can pay it down so that you pay it off over a period of time, whether it's 5 years or 7 years or 10 years, whatever you need to do. You got to have that plan, and you got to manage it yourself. The bank isn't going to do it for you in the case of an equity line.
So, Brad, if someone wants to talk to you about buying a used car, how would they go about reaching you?
The best way to reach me, Gary, is via my cell phone, which is 978-375-5531, or via email at brad@bradavergon.com. And how about you, Gary? How do they talk to you about buying a used car?
I'm the guy that's driving the 2016 Acura MDX with 140,000 miles on it, and just
I got you beat, Gary. I got cars that are way older than that.
Yeah, but mine's the daily driver. I've got nothing else. You've got a little fleet going there.
Right.
Anyway, I can be reached at 508-733-6005 or Gary@movewithgary.com. Thanks everyone for playing with us in this early September day.
Be well.
Thank you for watching All Things Real Estate. If you do have any questions, feel free to reach out to Brad or Gary.